A decorated Delta Force veteran, a man who'd worn the uniform in the world's most dangerous war zones, sits helpless in his wheelchair, strapped to the cold steel of active train tracks. The woman who swore to love him in sickness and in health, his own wife, put him there. She walked away without looking back, her heels clicking against the gravel as the distant rumble of an approaching freight train began to shake the earth. He couldn't move. He couldn't free himself. His legs, destroyed by an IED in Kandahar, were useless. But there was one soul who refused to abandon him. His canine partner, the German shepherd who'd saved his life overseas, stood between him and certain death, barking into the darkness. The dog wouldn't leave. The train was coming. And what happened in those final seconds would expose a conspiracy so twisted. It would bring an entire town's corruption crashing down. This is the story of the worst betrayal imaginable and the loyalty that conquered it. Before we begin, tell us wherever in the world you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The air in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, carried the scent of diesel and rust. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew your name, but no one really knew your secrets. The old freight line that cut through the east side hadn't seen regular passenger service in 20 years, but the cargo trains still rumbled through twice a day, shaking windows and rattling the bones of houses built too close to the tracks. His name was Thomas Reaper Calloway, 38 years old, former Delta Force operator, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and a career that ended not with a medal ceremony, but with an IED that shattered his spine and left him paralyzed from the waist down. Thomas wasn't wearing his uniform anymore. Those days were behind him. This afternoon he wore simple jeans and the worn Delta Force hoodie he'd slept in, the same clothes he'd been wearing when his wife, Vanessa, drugged his evening tea. The operator who'd once moved through enemy territory like a ghost was now just a disabled veteran in a small Pennsylvania town, trying to understand how the woman he loved had left him here to die. The wheelchair wasn't supposed to define him, but in the eyes of his wife, Vanessa, it had become all she could see. Not the man who'd carried wounded brothers through gunfire, not the husband who'd loved her since high school, just the burden. Just the broken soldier who couldn't walk any more cold. That's the first thing Thomas Calloway registered as consciousness clawed its way back into his mind. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver and reach for a blanket. This was different. This was the cold of metal against skin, the cold of steel that has been sitting in the October afternoon air for hours, leaching away every degree of warmth from whatever touches it. His eyes opened slowly, reluctantly. The world above him was a clear blue sky with scattered clouds, the late afternoon sun creating long shadows. Bright sunlight out here. Just clear skies and the distant view of Millbrook's downtown area, maybe 2 miles west. His breath came out in white clouds, and for a moment, just a moment, his mind couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Then the pain hit. His wrists. Something was cutting into his wrists. Thomas tried to move his arms and felt the bite of plastic restraints, the kind that tighten with every pull. Zip ties, military grade from the feel of them. His hands were bound behind him, secured to the frame of his wheelchair. His wheelchair. He was still in his wheelchair, and he was lying on train tracks. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The cold metal beneath him wasn't just cold metal. It was a rail. He could feel the wooden ties beneath his wheels, the gravel of the rail bed pressing through his jeans against legs that couldn't feel it, but that his mind remembered the sensation of. His heart, trained by years of combat to remain steady under fire, suddenly kicked into overdrive. Think, Reaper. Think. That's what they'd called him in Delta Force. Reaper. Because he'd brought death to America's enemies with cold precision. Because he'd survived situations that killed better men. Because he never panicked, never froze, never gave up. But right now, strapped to train tracks in the middle of the afternoon, his legs useless, his hands bound, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt since the IED blast in Kandahar. Fear. And then he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze colder than the steel beneath him, a vibration. Faint at first, barely perceptible, but growing. The rails were humming. Something was coming. A bark shattered the afternoon quiet. Sharp, urgent, desperate. Atlas! Thomas breathed. The German shepherd appeared in his field of vision, a dark shape against the bright blue sky. 90 pounds of muscle and loyalty and pure, desperate panic. Atlas wasn't barking the way he did when he wanted food or wanted to play. This was his alert bark, his danger bark, the bark he'd used in Kandahar when insurgents were close. The dog grabbed Thomas's jacket sleeve in his teeth and pulled. The wheelchair shifted maybe an inch. Atlas released, repositioned, grabbed the sleeve again, pulled harder. His paws scrabbled against the gravel, finding no purchase. He was trying to drag a 200-pound man in a 40-pound wheelchair off train tracks with nothing but determination and love. "Atlas, no!" Thomas commanded, his voice cracking. "Atlas, run! Get off the tracks! Run, boy!" The dog ignored him completely. Atlas had never ignored a command in his life. Not during training, not during deployment, not in the 2 years since they'd both come home broken. But he was ignoring this one. The vibration in the rails was getting stronger. Thomas's mind snapped into operator mode. Assessment. He had zip ties on his wrists, secured to the wheelchair frame. His legs were strapped to the footrests with what felt like leather belts. His chair was positioned perfectly perpendicular across the tracks. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was an execution. And there was only one person who could have done this. Vanessa. The memory came flooding back in fragments. The afternoon tea she'd made him, the way she'd insisted he drink it, said it would help him relax. The bitter aftertaste he'd noticed too late, the heaviness in his limbs, her face cold and distant as the world went dark. She'd drugged him. His own wife had drugged him, wheeled him out here and left him to die. The rails were vibrating constantly now. The hum had become a low rumble. Thomas could hear it in the distance, maybe a mile away. The freight train that came through at 4:47 every afternoon. He'd heard it from his bedroom window 1,000 times, never thinking he'd be lying on the tracks waiting for it. He had maybe 2 minutes. Atlas was barking continuously now, a sound of pure anguish. The dog ran to the edge of the tracks, barked into the afternoon air as if trying to summon help, then ran back to Thomas and grabbed his sleeve again. Pull, strain, release, reposition, pull again. The wheelchair moved another inch. Thomas twisted his wrists, feeling the zip ties cut deeper into his skin. He could feel blood, warm against the cold afternoon air. The ties were tight, but they were plastic. Everything has a breaking point. He just needed leverage. He threw his weight to the left, hard. The wheelchair tilted. Not enough. Again. The chair rocked. Atlas, sensing what Thomas was trying to do, grabbed the armrest and pulled in the same direction. The chair tipped further. The rumble was getting louder. Thomas could hear the diesel engine now, a low mechanical growl growing steadily closer. One more time, Thomas threw every ounce of his upper body strength, muscles built from 2 years of compensating for legs that didn't work, into a violent twist. The wheelchair tipped. For a moment it balanced on one wheel, and Thomas thought it might go over, might give him the angle he needed to break the zip ties against the frame. Then it slammed back down. The train's headlight appeared around the bend, bright even in the afternoon sun, cutting through the clear air 1/2 mile away. Atlas let out a howl that Thomas had never heard before. It was the sound of a creature watching its entire world about to be destroyed. The dog positioned himself on the tracks between Thomas and the approaching train, as if his body could somehow stop 50 tons of steel and momentum. "No," Thomas whispered. "No, boy, move. Please move." The train's horn blared. The engineer had seen them. The horn kept blaring, a continuous scream of warning. Thomas heard the squeal of brakes being applied. But he knew the physics. A freight train doing 40 miles an hour needs over 1/4 mile to stop. The engineer had maybe 1,500 feet. They were going to die. Both of them. Thomas closed his eyes, and his mind did what it always did in the face of death. It went back. Back to before. Back to when his legs worked. Back to when Vanessa looked at him with love instead of resentment. Back to the moment everything changed. 72 hours earlier, Thomas Calloway had woken to the sound of Atlas's wet nose pressing against his cheek. It was 6:15 in the morning, exactly the same time they woke every day. Routine, structure. The military had taught him that routine was survival, and even though he'd been medically retired for 2 years, some habits never died. "All right, boy, I'm up." Atlas stepped back, his tail wagging in the slow, controlled way that said he was happy but still on duty. Always on duty. The dog had saved Thomas's life in Kandahar when insurgents ambushed their patrol. Atlas had detected the IED before Thomas stepped on it, had pushed him back. Thomas had still been in the blast radius when a different IED detonated, but Atlas's warning had meant he'd been far enough away to survive. Barely. His legs hadn't been so lucky. Thomas transferred from the bed to his wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The chair was custom-built, lightweight titanium frame, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. His veteran benefits and disability payments covered it, along with the mortgage on the small house on Millbrook's east side. The house was quiet. Vanessa was already gone, though her shift at the medical office didn't start until 9. She'd been leaving early a lot lately, coming home late. Thomas tried not to notice. Tried not to care. In the kitchen he made coffee and scrambled eggs, feeding Atlas first the way he always did. The dog ate from a raised bowl, his military working dog tags jingling softly against the metal. Atlas wasn't officially a service dog anymore. After Thomas's injury, the dog had been retired from active duty too. They'd both been broken on the same deployment. They'd both come home to try to build something that looked like a normal life. It wasn't working. Thomas could see it in Vanessa's eyes every time she looked at him. He wasn't the man she'd married. That man could walk. That man had worn the uniform with pride. That man had swept her off her feet at Millbrook High School when they were 17, had promised her adventures and excitement and a life bigger than this small Pennsylvania town. Now he was just the broken soldier in the wheelchair, and she was trapped taking care of him. She'd never said it out loud. She didn't have to. At 8:30, Maya Rodriguez knocked on the door. Maya was his physical therapist, a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and an iron will. She'd been working with Thomas for 18 months, helping him build the upper body strength he needed to maintain independence. "Morning, Reaper," she said, using his call sign the way Marcus did. She was one of the few civilians who knew his Delta Force background. "Ready to hurt today?" "Always." They worked for 90 minutes. Resistance bands, parallel bars, core exercises. Maya pushed him hard, and Thomas was grateful for it. The physical pain was clean. Simple. It made sense in a way that nothing else in his life did anymore. "You're getting stronger," Maya said as they finished. Then her expression shifted, became more serious. "Thomas, I have to ask, is everything okay at home?" "Fine. Why?" "You just seem, I don't know, more tense than usual. And Vanessa called yesterday asking about your medication schedule." "My medication schedule?" "Yeah. What time you take your afternoon meds, whether they make you drowsy. I thought it was odd. She's your wife. She should know that." Thomas filed that information away, not sure what to make of it. "Everything's fine, Maya. Thanks for asking." But it wasn't fine. And later that afternoon, when Thomas opened the mailbox and found a stack of credit card statements addressed to Vanessa, statements from cards he didn't know she had, showing thousands of dollars in charges at expensive boutiques and restaurants he'd never been to, he knew something was very wrong. That afternoon, Marcus called. Marcus Ghost Chen, his Delta Force brother. They'd served together for 6 years, had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. Marcus video called every Wednesday at 3 p.m. without fail. He was currently stationed at Fort Bragg, still active duty, still whole. "You look like hell, brother," Marcus said, his face filling the laptop screen. "Rough day." "Vanessa?" Thomas hesitated. Marcus had never liked Vanessa, had told Thomas at their wedding that something about her didn't sit right. Thomas had ignored him. "Yeah. Talk to me." "I found credit card statements. She's spending money we don't have. She's been distant for months. And she's asking my physical therapist about my medication schedule." Marcus's expression went cold. Thomas knew that look. That was Ghost's operator face. "Reaper, you need to be careful. That's not normal behavior." "I know. I'm serious. I've seen situations like this go bad. Maybe I should come out there for a visit." "I'm fine, Ghost. I can handle my own wife." "Can you?" The question hung in the air. Atlas, lying at Thomas's feet, suddenly raised his head. His ears swiveled toward the front door. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Hold on," Thomas said. He wheeled himself to the window and looked out. A black Range Rover was parked across the street. Expensive. Not from this neighborhood. As Thomas watched, the driver's side door opened and Vanessa stepped out. She was laughing, her head tilted back. Then the passenger door opened and a man emerged. Tall, silver hair, expensive suit. He walked around the car and put his hand on the small of Vanessa's back. They stood there talking for a moment, too comfortable, too familiar. Then the man handed Vanessa something. An envelope. She tucked it into her purse quickly, looked around as if checking whether anyone was watching, then walked toward the house. The Range Rover drove away. "Reaper, you there?" Marcus's voice came from the laptop. Thomas wheeled back to the computer. "Ghost, I need you to run a plate for me." He recited the Range Rover's number, which his trained memory had automatically captured. "On it. I'll call you back." Vanessa came through the front door a moment later, her expression bright and artificial. "Hey, honey. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." "Who was that?" Thomas asked. She froze for just a fraction of a second. "Who was what?" "The man in the Range Rover." Her smile didn't falter, but Thomas saw the calculation in her eyes. "Oh, that was just Richard." Richard Crane. He's a real estate developer. He stopped to ask directions. He gave you an envelope. Just his business card and some information about property values in the neighborhood. He's looking to buy in the area. She walked to the kitchen, dismissing the conversation. Are you hungry? I can make dinner. Thomas watched her go. Richard Crane. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Atlas walked over to Vanessa as she opened the refrigerator and did something he'd never done before. He growled at her. Vanessa jumped back. What the hell? Atlas, no! The dog didn't stop growling. His lips were pulled back, showing teeth. Every hair on his spine was standing up. Thomas had seen Atlas face down armed insurgents with less aggression. Atlas, stand down. Thomas commanded. The dog immediately stopped growling, but he didn't stop staring at Vanessa. He positioned himself between her and Thomas, his body rigid. Your dog is losing it, Vanessa said, her voice shaking. Maybe he needs to be put down. He's never done that before. Well, he just did. I'm going to bed. I have an early shift tomorrow. It was only 5:30 in the afternoon. Thomas sat in the living room for a long time after she left. Atlas pressed against his leg. The dog knew something Thomas was only beginning to suspect. His wife was planning something. Marcus called back an hour later. The Range Rover is registered to Richard Crane, age 52, CEO of Crane Development Corporation. Net worth estimated at $40 million. And Reaper, here's where it gets interesting. He's been buying up properties all over Millbrook's east side for the past 2 years, building some kind of massive commercial complex. Your neighborhood. Why haven't I heard about this? Because he's been doing it quietly. Shell corporations, private sales, and the people who refused to sell have had some really bad luck. House fires, break-ins. One guy got hit by a car and is in a coma. Nothing provable, but the pattern is there. Thomas felt ice forming in his chest. What does he want with Vanessa? I don't know, brother, but I don't like it. Let me do some more digging. That afternoon, Thomas pretended to rest. At 2 p.m., he heard Vanessa's phone buzz. He heard her step outside, heard her whisper into the phone. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the tone. Intimate. Excited. At 3 p.m., after she left for errands, he got up and quietly wheeled himself to the living room. Vanessa's purse was on the counter where she'd left it. Thomas knew he was crossing a line, but he didn't care anymore. He opened it. Inside was the envelope. He pulled out the contents. There were 2 things, a business card for Richard Crane and a real estate appraisal for Thomas's property. His home. The estimated value was $350,000. There was a handwritten note clipped to it in expensive pen. Final piece. Will be worth the wait. R. Thomas's hands were shaking as he put everything back. He wheeled himself back to bed and lay there in the afternoon light, his mind racing. Atlas jumped onto the bed, which he wasn't supposed to do, and pressed against Thomas's side. I know, boy, Thomas whispered. I know. What Thomas didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that across town in a penthouse suite overlooking Millbrook's modest downtown during the same afternoon, Richard Crane was pouring 2 glasses of very expensive champagne. The penthouse was everything Millbrook wasn't. Sleek, modern, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire town bathed in afternoon sunlight, spread out below like a game board waiting to be played. Richard Crane stood at those windows, watching the shadows lengthen, seeing not a community, but an opportunity. Behind him, Sheriff Wade Brennan sat on a leather sofa that cost more than the sheriff made in 3 months. Wade was a big man running to fat, with the kind of face that looked friendly until you saw the coldness in his eyes. He'd been on Richard's payroll for 3 years, ever since Richard had first started buying properties in Millbrook. The Calloway problem is almost solved, Richard said, not turning from the window. Vanessa has agreed to the plan. You sure she'll go through with it? Wade asked. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually kill your husband. She'll do it. I've made sure of it. I've been working on her for 6 months, convinced her that she's wasting her life taking care of a cripple, shown her what life could be like with someone who can actually give her what she deserves. Richard took a sip of his champagne. The human mind is a fascinating thing, Wade. You can't just tell someone to commit murder. You have to make them believe it's not murder. It's mercy, liberation. I've convinced Vanessa that Thomas would be better off dead, that she'd be doing him a favor. And once he's gone, she gets $500,000 in life insurance and veteran benefits. And you get the property. I get the final piece of the puzzle. That house sits on 0.2 acres of premium real estate. It's the last privately owned parcel in the development zone. I've spent $18 million buying up everything else. Calloway's property is all that stands between me and a $200 million commercial complex. Wade shifted uncomfortably. The previous accidents, those were one thing. But this is a decorated veteran. Delta Force. If anyone digs too deep, no one will dig. Richard interrupted. Because you'll make sure they don't. It'll be a tragic accident. A disabled veteran, depressed about his condition, wheels himself onto the train tracks in the afternoon. PTSD. Maybe he was drinking. You'll write the report. It'll be airtight. What about the dog? What about it? The German Shepherd. It's a military working dog. Those animals are trained to protect. It won't let anyone near Calloway without raising hell. Richard finally turned from the window. Then the dog dies too. Collateral damage. Make it part of the tragedy. Loyal dog tries to save his master, both killed by the train. It'll play well in the papers. Might even get us some sympathy. Wade looked at his glass of champagne. He'd crossed a lot of lines working for Richard Crane, but this felt different. Messier. When? 3 days. Wednesday afternoon, 4:47 p.m., when the freight train comes through. Vanessa will drug him during his afternoon tea. Something strong enough that he won't wake up for hours. She'll wheel him to the tracks, secure him, and leave. The train does the rest. And if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. I've planned this perfectly. Vanessa thinks she's getting a new life with me and $500,000. What she's actually getting is enough money to disappear quietly after signing over the property. She's a loose end, Wade. Useful now, disposable later. The sheriff said nothing. He'd learned not to ask too many questions about what happened to people after they'd served their purpose for Richard Crane. What neither of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that at that exact moment, Marcus Chen was sitting in his quarters at Fort Bragg, running searches through databases that civilians didn't know existed. He was connecting dots, building a picture, and what he was seeing made him very, very angry. Richard Crane wasn't just a real estate developer. He was connected to 3 different shell corporations that led back to a money laundering operation running through Pennsylvania. The accidents that had happened to property owners weren't accidents at all. They were hits, professional, planned. And now Vanessa Calloway was making phone calls to Richard Crane in the afternoon. Marcus picked up his phone and called Thomas back. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Reaper, it's Ghost. Listen to me carefully. Richard Crane is not just some developer. He's connected to organized crime. Real estate is how he launders money. And brother, I found something else. Your wife took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. $500,000. She never told you about it because she's not supposed to. The beneficiary has to be disclosed, and she listed herself. Reaper, you need to get somewhere safe. Today, don't eat or drink anything she gives you. Don't trust her. And whatever you do, don't let your guard down. The message went to voicemail because Thomas had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, his phone on silent. He never heard the warning. And when Vanessa brought him tea the next afternoon, smiling that bright artificial smile, telling him she'd made his favorite blend to help him relax, he drank it. Because despite everything, despite all the warning signs, despite the credit cards and the late arrivals home and Atlas's growling, some part of Thomas still couldn't believe that the woman he'd loved since he was 17 years old was capable of murder. He was wrong. The last thing he remembered before unconsciousness took him was Vanessa's face and the coldness in her eyes as she watched him drink. When he woke up, he was strapped to train tracks, and a freight train was bearing down on him with the inevitability of death itself. The headlight was blinding now, bright even against the afternoon sun. The horn was continuous. Atlas was barking and Thomas was pulling against the restraints with everything he had, and the rails were screaming and the world was shaking and... A voice, young, female, terrified. Oh my God! Oh my God! Thomas's eyes snapped to the side. A girl, teenage, standing at the edge of the tracks, frozen in horror. She was wearing a diner uniform, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd been cutting through the rail yard. Wrong place, wrong time. Or maybe exactly the right place at exactly the right time. "Help me!" Thomas screamed. "Please, help me!" The train was 300 yards away. The girl ran. Sophie Martinez had exactly 7 seconds to make a decision that would define the rest of her life. She was 17 years old, 5 feet 3 inches of wiry muscle and exhaustion, coming off a double shift at the Bluebird Diner, finishing at 4 p.m., where she'd served coffee and eggs to truckers and tired families for 12 straight hours. Her feet hurt, her back hurt. The smell of fryer grease had soaked into her hair and skin so deeply she wondered if she'd ever get it out. All she wanted was to get home and rest. The rail yard was a shortcut she'd used 100 times. Her mother had told her not to. The police had told her not to. But Sophie was 17 and invincible. And the shortcut saved her 20 minutes of walking, and she'd never seen anything more dangerous than a possum. Until today. The man strapped to the tracks was screaming at her. The massive dog was barking. And the train, oh God, the train was so close she could feel the vibration through the soles of her sneakers. Its headlight was bright even in the afternoon sun, the train's approach creating urgency and danger. The horn was so loud it felt like it was splitting her skull open. Every rational instinct in Sophie's body screamed at her to run, to get away from the tracks, to save herself. This wasn't her problem. This wasn't her responsibility. She was just a girl trying to get home. But Sophie's father had been a Marine. He'd died in Iraq when she was 9 years old. And the only thing she really remembered about him was what he'd told her the last time she saw him before he deployed. "Mija, when you see someone who needs help, you don't ask if it's convenient. You don't ask if it's safe. You just help. That's what separates the good people from the scared people." Sophie had 7 seconds to decide if she was good or scared. She ran towards the tracks. "I'm coming!" she screamed, even though the man probably couldn't hear her over the train horn. "I'm coming, hold on." The German shepherd saw her first. He spun around, teeth bared, placing himself between Sophie and the man. A protective stance. But the dog was smart enough, or desperate enough, to recognize help when he saw it. His barking changed from aggressive to urgent. "Come here. Help him. Now." Sophie hit the tracks and nearly fell, her sneakers slipping on the gravel. She caught herself on the wheelchair, and for one horrible moment she thought about trying to drag it off the tracks. But the chair was wedged, the wheels locked. The man was a solid 200 pounds of dead weight secured to the frame. They'd never make it. "The restraints!" the man shouted. His voice was hoarse, raw from screaming. "Cut the restraints! My wrists!" Sophie's hands were shaking so badly she could barely unzip her backpack. She carried a pocket knife. Her mother made her carry it for protection on late walks. She'd never imagined she'd need it for this. The train was maybe 200 yards away now. The engineer was leaning on the horn continuously. The brakes were screaming. But Sophie knew enough about trains to know the physics. Momentum, mass, Newton's laws. The train wasn't going to stop in time. She got the knife open. The blade was 3 inches long, serrated, meant for cutting rope or opening packages. The man's wrists were bound behind his back with thick zip ties, the kind movers used on heavy boxes. His skin was torn where he'd been fighting against them, blood making the plastic slippery. "Hold still," Sophie gasped. Her hands were shaking so badly she was afraid she'd cut him. The dog pressed against her side, his body warm and solid. Strangely, it helped, made her steadier. She sawed at the first zip tie. The blade bit into the plastic. The tie was thick, industrial grade. It wasn't cutting. 150 yards. The train's headlight was so bright she couldn't see anything else. The world was reduced to light and sound and terror. "Harder!" the man yelled. "Cut harder!" Sophie bore down with all her weight. The knife slipped, nearly stabbed into the man's wrist. He didn't flinch. She repositioned, found the tie again, sawed with desperate strength. The plastic snapped. One hand free. The man immediately reached for the belts securing his legs to the footrests. His fingers were clumsy from being bound, from the cold, from fear. He fumbled with the buckles. They were leather, old, tight. 100 yards. "We have to go!" Sophie screamed. "We have to go now! I can't leave the chair. You'll die!" The first belt came free. The man grabbed the second one, his fingers working faster now. The German shepherd had his teeth in the man's jacket, pulling, trying to help. The dog's paws were scrabbling against the gravel, and Sophie saw they were bleeding. 75 yards. The ground was shaking, rocks were bouncing on the railbed. The horn was one continuous, deafening scream. The second belt opened. "Grab him!" the man shouted at Sophie. "Under the arms! Pull!" Sophie didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the man under his armpits, her fingers digging into his jacket. He was heavy. So heavy. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug. She pulled with strength she didn't know she had, and the man pushed with his arms against the wheelchair, and the dog grabbed the back of his collar and pulled too. The wheelchair tipped forward. The man slid out. And suddenly all 3 of them were tumbling backward off the tracks, falling down the gravel embankment in a tangle of limbs and fur and terror. 50 yards. They hit the bottom of the embankment hard. Sophie felt the air blast out of her lungs. The man landed on top of her, and the dog landed on top of him, and for a moment everything was pain and confusion. Then the train passed. It was like being inside a thunderstorm made of metal. The noise wasn't just loud, it was physical. It hammered into Sophie's chest, her skull, her bones. The wind from the train's passage was a hurricane. It tore at their clothes, filled Sophie's mouth with grit and diesel fumes. The ground shook so violently she thought the earth was coming apart. Freight car after freight car after freight car screamed past, each one a reminder of the death they'd just escaped by maybe 3 seconds, maybe less. And then, after an eternity that was probably 30 seconds, The last car passed. The caboose light disappeared into the distance. The sound began to fade. The world stopped shaking. Silence. Not real silence. Sophie's ears were ringing so badly she thought she might be deaf. But compared to the train, it felt like silence. She lay there in the gravel, staring up at the clear blue afternoon sky, unable to move. Unable to process what had just happened. She was alive. The man was alive. They were alive. The dog recovered first. Atlas pushed himself off Thomas and immediately began checking his handler, nose pressed to Thomas's neck, his chest, his face. A medical assessment. The dog was limping, his paws torn and bleeding, but he was moving. He was okay. Thomas rolled off Sophie, gasping. "Are you hurt? Did I hurt you?" Sophie couldn't answer. She was trying to breathe and failing. Her lungs wouldn't work right. Everything felt distant and strange. Hey, look at me." The man's face appeared above her. He had dark hair, short military cut. His eyes were intense, focused, kind. "You're in shock. You're okay. Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Come on, you can do it." Sophie focused on his voice. In through the nose, out through the mouth. After a few breaths, her lungs remembered how to work. "There you go," the man said. "That's it. You're okay. You're okay." "We almost died," Sophie whispered. "But we didn't. Because of you." The man's hand was on her shoulder, steady and warm. "What's your name?" "Sophie. Sophie Martinez." "Sophie, I'm Thomas Calloway, and you just saved my life." That's when Sophie noticed he wasn't moving his legs. They were just lying there, motionless. She looked around and saw the wheelchair, still on the tracks 30 feet away, one wheel hanging over the rail where they'd left it. "Your chair. Doesn't matter. I'm alive. We're alive. That matters." Sophie sat up slowly. Everything hurt. Her back, her arms, her hands. She looked at her palms and saw they were torn up from the gravel, bleeding. Her jeans were ripped at both knees. She was going to have bruises everywhere tomorrow. "I need to call 911, she said, reaching for her backpack. It had fallen a few feet away. Her phone was inside. "Wait." Thomas's voice stopped her. "Before you do, I need to ask you something. Did you see anyone else? Before you found me? Anyone near the tracks?" Sophie tried to remember. She'd been so focused on her feet, on getting home, on how much everything hurt. "No, I don't think so. Why?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Atlas pressed against his side, and Thomas wrapped an arm around the dog. "Because someone put me here. Someone strapped me to those tracks and left me to die." The words hung in the afternoon air. Sophie stared at him, her exhausted mind trying to process what he was saying. "Someone tried to murder you?" "Yes." "Who? Why?" "I don't know yet. But Sophie, when the police come, they're going to ask you questions. I need you to tell them exactly what you saw. Every detail, the zip ties, the belts, the position of the wheelchair. Can you do that?" Sophie nodded slowly. She was 17 years old. She'd just pulled a man off train tracks seconds before he would have been killed, and now he was telling her it was attempted murder. This was so far beyond her understanding of how the world worked that she couldn't even process it. She called 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency?" "I'm at the old rail yard on the east side. A man was tied to the train tracks. We got him off, but he's hurt. We need help." "You're saying someone was on the train tracks?" "Yes, he was strapped to a wheelchair. Someone tried to kill him. The train almost hit us. We need police and an ambulance, now." There was a pause. "Units are on the way. Stay on the line. Is anyone injured?" Sophie looked at Thomas. He was pale, his wrists were bleeding, and he was covered in dirt and gravel. Yes, he's bleeding, and I think I am too. What's your name? Sophie Martinez. Okay, Sophie, help is coming. Don't move him. Don't try to move him back to his wheelchair. Just keep him warm. Sophie took off her jacket and put it over Thomas. It was a thin, diner-issue windbreaker, practically useless, but it was all she had. Atlas immediately lay down on top of the jacket, adding his body heat. They waited. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The first vehicle to arrive wasn't an ambulance. It was a sheriff's cruiser. It came fast, lights blazing, and skidded to a stop on the access road near the tracks. A man got out. Big, maybe 50 years old, wearing a sheriff's uniform that looked a size too small. He had a flashlight in one hand and his other hand resting on his weapon. "Sheriff Wade Brennan," he called out. "I got a report of people on the tracks. Everybody okay?" "We're at the bottom of the embankment," Sophie yelled back. "We need medical." The sheriff made his way down carefully, his flashlight beam sweeping over them. When it landed on Thomas, something flashed across the sheriff's face. An expression Sophie couldn't quite read. Surprise? Concern? Or something else? "Thomas Calloway," Sheriff Brennan said. "That you?" "Hello, Wade." So they knew each other. Sophie filed that information away. What in the hell happened here? The sheriff was looking at the wheelchair still on the tracks, then at Thomas, then at Sophie. "Dispatch said someone was tied to the tracks. That true?" "Yes," Thomas said. His voice had changed. It was flat now, emotionless. Sophie recognized that tone. Her mother used it when she was talking to her landlord, or the electric company, or anyone she didn't trust. "I was drugged, bound with zip ties and leather straps, wheeled onto the tracks, and left to die. If Sophie hadn't come along, I'd be dead right now." Sheriff Brennan's flashlight settled on Sophie. "That right, young lady? You saw him tied up?" "Yes, sir. Zip ties on his wrists. Belts on his legs. I cut the zip ties with my knife. We got him off maybe 3 seconds before the train came through." 3 seconds, the sheriff repeated. He walked over to the tracks, shining his light on the wheelchair. "And where are these zip ties now?" "One's still on the chair," Thomas said. "The other one I pulled off after Sophie cut it free. Should be in the gravel somewhere up there." The sheriff climbed up the embankment, taking his time. He found the zip tie, picked it up with a pen, examined it. Then he put it in his pocket. "You're contaminating evidence," Thomas said. "I'm securing evidence," the sheriff replied. "Don't want some train worker finding it and throwing it away before we can process it properly." More sirens. An ambulance pulled up, then another sheriff's cruiser. A young woman got out of the second cruiser. She was maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. Her nameplate read, Reeves. "Deputy Anna Reeves." She introduced herself, making her way down to them. "Sir, are you injured?" "His wrists are bleeding," Sophie said. "And his legs. I'm paralyzed," Thomas interrupted. "Have been for 2 years. My wrists need attention, and I'm probably hypothermic, but I'm alive." The paramedics arrived with a stretcher and a medical kit. They began working on Thomas immediately, cutting away his jacket, wrapping his wrists, checking his vitals. One of them brought a blanket for Sophie. Deputy Reeves pulled out a notebook. "I need to take statements from both of you while the scene is fresh. Miss Martinez, why don't we start with you? Walk me through exactly what you saw." Sophie told her everything. The time she'd arrived at the rail yard, how she'd been cutting through to get home, the exact position of Thomas and the wheelchair, the zip ties, the belts, the dog, The desperate rescue. Deputy Reeves wrote it all down, asked clarifying questions, had Sophie repeat certain details. Sheriff Brennan watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. When Sophie finished, Deputy Reeves moved to Thomas. "Mr. Calloway, do you remember anything about how you got here?" "I remember having tea with my wife around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Vanessa made it for me. Said it would help me relax. I drank it. After that, everything's blank until I woke up on the tracks." "Your wife," Deputy Reeves repeated, writing. "That would be Vanessa Calloway?" "Yes. And you're suggesting she drugged you?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what happened. I drank tea she made. I lost consciousness. I woke up tied to train tracks. Draw your own conclusions." Sheriff Brennan stepped in. "Now, Thomas, let's not jump to any wild accusations here. You've been through a trauma. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. PTSD can cause confusion, disorientation. Maybe you had an episode, wheeled yourself out here in a fugue state. A fugue state." Thomas interrupted, his voice cold as the steel they'd been lying on. "Wade, I was bound with zip ties and leather belts. You saw them. You think I tied myself up? Maybe you were trying to hurt yourself. You've been through a lot, son. Lost the use of your legs. That's hard on a man. Sometimes people in your situation, they get dark thoughts. I did not try to kill myself. The alternative is that someone tried to murder you. And you're saying that someone was your wife. That's a hell of an accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." Sophie watched the exchange, her exhaustion making everything feel surreal. The sheriff was trying to rewrite what happened. Right in front of her. Right in front of Deputy Reeves, who was still writing in her notebook, her expression carefully neutral. "Sheriff," Deputy Reeves said quietly, "we should photograph the scene, the wheelchair position, the remaining zip tie. We need to process this properly." "I'll handle the scene," Sheriff Brennan said. "You get their statements finished and get them to the hospital. This young lady needs to be checked out, and Mr. Calloway needs medical attention and psychological evaluation." "I don't need a psychological evaluation," Thomas said. "I need you to investigate an attempted murder." "And I will, but first, let's get you taken care of." The paramedics loaded Thomas onto the stretcher. Atlas refused to leave his side, growling at anyone who tried to separate them. Finally, one of the paramedics shrugged and helped the dog into the ambulance. "Miss Martinez, you should ride with them," Deputy Reeves said. "Get yourself checked out." Sophie nodded. She was starting to shake, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving nothing but exhaustion and shock. She climbed into the ambulance. As they pulled away, Sophie looked back through the rear window. She saw Sheriff Brennan standing on the tracks, his flashlight sweeping over the wheelchair. Then he did something strange. He looked around, as if checking whether anyone was watching. Then he reached down and picked something up from the tracks. Something small. Sophie couldn't see what it was. But instead of putting it in an evidence bag, the sheriff put it in his pocket. And then he kicked gravel over the spot where it had been. Sophie's blood went cold. She looked at Thomas. He just took something from the scene, and he's covering it up. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I saw. He's part of it, isn't he? Whoever tried to kill you, the sheriff knows about it." "Yes. Then what do we do?" Thomas closed his eyes. His hands, bandaged now, were clenched into fists. "We survive long enough to prove it." The Millbrook Community Hospital was a small facility, 20 beds, mostly used for minor emergencies and elderly care. At 6 in the evening it was relatively quiet. Thomas was taken to an examination room. Sophie was taken to another. Atlas was technically not allowed inside, But the evening nurse took one look at the bleeding, protective German shepherd and decided hospital policy could be flexible for one evening. Thomas was lying on the examination table when his phone buzzed. Someone had retrieved it from his house along with his wallet. He looked at the screen. 15 missed calls, 10 from Vanessa, 5 from a number he didn't recognize, and 1 text from Marcus, time stamped from 8 hours earlier. The message made Thomas's blood run cold. "Reaper, it's Ghost. Listen to me carefully. Richard Crane is not just some developer. He's connected to organized crime. Real estate is how he launders money. And brother, I found something else. Your wife took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, $500,000. She never told you about it because she's not supposed to. The beneficiary has to be disclosed, and she listed herself. Reaper, you need to get somewhere safe, today. Don't eat or drink anything she gives you. Don't trust her. And whatever you do, don't let your guard down." The tea. She'd given him tea 8 hours after Marcus sent this message. 8 hours too late. Thomas was reading the message a third time when Vanessa burst through the door. She looked perfect. Hair done, makeup fresh, wearing the expensive coat Thomas had seen on a credit card statement. She ran to his bedside, her face a mask of concern that Thomas now recognized as completely artificial. "Oh my God, Thomas, I just heard. Are you okay?" "What happened?" She reached for his hand, and he pulled away. Her eyes widened, hurt, confused. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Where were you this afternoon, Vanessa?" "What? I was home. I was resting. The police called me an hour ago. I came straight here." "You were home?" "Yes, resting. Where else would I be?" She looked at the bandages on his wrists, the hospital gown, the dirt still under his fingernails. "Thomas, what happened? The sheriff said something about you being on the train tracks. That doesn't make sense. How did you get all the way out there?" Thomas looked at her. Really looked at her. She was good. He had to give her that. If he hadn't read Marcus's message, if he hadn't woken up on those tracks, he might have believed her. "The tea you made me. What was in it?" Something flickered behind her eyes. "Tea? Honey, I don't know what you're talking about. You didn't have tea this afternoon. You went to rest early. You said you were tired." "I remember the tea, Vanessa." "Thomas, you're confused. You've been through something traumatic. The sheriff thinks you might have had a PTSD episode, that you might have hurt yourself." "I didn't hurt myself. Someone drugged me, tied me to train tracks, and left me to die." Vanessa's hand went to her mouth. Perfect shock. Perfect horror. "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" "You tell me." The mask slipped for just a second. Thomas saw it, the flash of cold calculation in her eyes before the concerned wife expression snapped back into place. "I think the doctors need to examine you. You're not making sense. You're saying someone tried to kill you? Thomas, that's paranoid. That's not healthy." The door opened. Deputy Anna Reeves stepped in, followed by Sheriff Brennan. The sheriff's expression was carefully neutral, but Thomas saw the way his eyes went to Vanessa, the slight nod she gave him. They knew each other. Of course they did. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone. But it was more than that. Thomas had spent years reading people in hostile environments. He saw the silent communication between them, the coordination. "Mrs. Calloway," Sheriff Brennan said. "Glad you're here. Your husband has been making some concerning statements, saying he thinks he was drugged and attacked." "I know," Vanessa said, her voice breaking perfectly. "I don't know what's happening. He's saying I gave him tea this afternoon. Wade, I didn't. I was resting. When I woke up, he was gone. I thought he was just in the living room. I had no idea he'd left the house." "The house was locked," Deputy Reeves said quietly. "I checked. Front door, back door, both locked from the inside. If Mr. Calloway left, he would have had to lock the door behind him. My wheelchair has controls, Thomas said. Anyone could have wheeled me out and then gone back to lock the doors. Or, Sheriff Brennan said, you wheeled yourself out, and in your confused state, you somehow ended up on the tracks. Mr. Calloway, I've seen PTSD do strange things to good men. There's no shame in getting help. I was tied up. There's a witness. Sophie Martinez saw everything. Sophie Martinez is a 17-year-old girl coming off a double shift, the sheriff said. She was exhausted. It was late afternoon. Light was fading. She saw what she thought she saw, but eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially under stress. There's physical evidence, the zip ties, the belts. There's one zip tie that could have come from anywhere, and the belts were standard wheelchair restraints, the kind you use yourself. Thomas felt the trap closing around him. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. A disabled veteran with PTSD, confused and suicidal, a concerned wife, a tragic near miss, no crime, no investigation. I want a blood test, Thomas said. If I was drugged, it'll show up. Of course, Sheriff Brennan said. Standard procedure. Deputy Reeves will make sure the hospital does a full toxicology screen. But Thomas saw the look that passed between the sheriff and Vanessa. The blood test would come back clean. They'd make sure of it. A switched sample. A lost result. It didn't matter. They controlled the chain of evidence. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Parking lot. Silver pickup. Back corner. 5 minutes. Come alone. Ghost. Marcus was here. Thomas's training kicked in. He needed to extract. The hospital was compromised. The sheriff was compromised. He needed to get to Ghost and regroup. Plan, prepare. I'd like some time alone with my wife, Thomas said. Of course, Sheriff Brennan said. We'll give you folks some privacy. Mrs. Calloway, when you're ready, I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. Just standard procedure. Of course, Wade. Thank you. They left. Vanessa turned to Thomas, her expression softening. Baby, I know you're confused and scared, but I'm here. We're going to get through this together. Thomas looked at the woman he'd loved for 20 years, the woman he'd married, the woman who'd stood beside him when the doctors said he'd never walk again, the woman who'd just tried to kill him. I need to use the bathroom, he said. I'll call the nurse. I can transfer myself. I just need privacy. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. Of course. I'll wait right here. Thomas wheeled himself to the bathroom. As soon as the door closed, he looked at his phone. 3 minutes. He opened the window. It was small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, but Thomas had fit through smaller spaces in Afghanistan. He checked the drop. 8 feet. He could handle it. Atlas, who'd followed him into the bathroom, whined softly. I know, boy. Not exactly protocol. But we need to go. Thomas pulled himself up to the window, his upper body strength the one thing the IED hadn't taken from him. He pushed the screen out, grabbed the window frame, and pulled himself through. The drop was harder than he'd expected. He hit the ground and rolled, his useless legs dragging. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't make a sound. Atlas jumped through the window after him, landing lightly beside him. Thomas looked around. He was in an alley behind the hospital. The parking lot was 50 yards away. He could see a silver pickup truck in the back corner. He started dragging himself toward it, using his arms, his fingers digging into gravel and dirt. It was slow, agonizing, but he'd crawled through worse in Kandahar. Atlas pressed against his side, and Thomas grabbed the dog's harness. Atlas had been trained for this. for helping wounded soldiers move. The dog pulled, and Thomas pushed, and together they made their way across the alley. The truck's door opened. A figure jumped out and ran toward him. Marcus Ghost Chen, moving fast and low, scanning for threats. He reached Thomas and scooped him up like he weighed nothing. "You look like hell, Reaper." "Good to see you too, Ghost." Marcus got Thomas into the truck, lifted Atlas into the back seat, and climbed behind the wheel. They were pulling out of the parking lot when Thomas saw Sheriff Brennan running out of the hospital, Vanessa beside him. Too late. Ghost drove fast, taking back roads Thomas didn't recognize. After 10 minutes he pulled into an abandoned gas station and killed the lights. "Talk to me," Ghost said. "Everything," Thomas told him. The tea. The tracks. Sophie. The sheriff's cover-up. Vanessa's performance. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every word. "It's worse than I thought," Marcus said when Thomas finished. "Richard Crane isn't just buying properties, he's eliminating obstacles. I've got evidence of 3 other property owners who died or were seriously injured in the last 2 years. All of them refused to sell. All of them had accidents that the sheriff's department wrote off as bad luck. Vanessa's working with him. Yeah, and she's working with Sheriff Brennan. I did some digging on my drive up. Brennan gets a salary from the county, but he also gets payments from a shell corporation owned by Crane. Has been for 3 years. He's not just covering up crimes, he's facilitating them." Thomas leaned back against the seat. His wrists throbbed. His body ached. Atlas pressed his head against Thomas's shoulder, a warm, solid presence. "So what do we do?" "We need evidence. Real evidence. The kind that can't be dismissed or covered up. And we need someone who isn't compromised." Ghost pulled out his phone and made a call. "Deputy Reeves, this is Marcus Chen. I'm a friend of Thomas Calloway's. I think you and I need to talk." He listened for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah, I saw you taking photos at the scene. I saw you writing down everything Sophie said. You're not buying the sheriff's suicide story. Meet me at the old grain elevator on Route 7. 1 hour. Come alone." He hung up. "You trust her?" Thomas asked. "I trust that she's pissed off about being lied to. That's enough for now." They drove to the grain elevator, a massive structure that had been abandoned for decades. Ghost parked behind it, out of sight from the road. They waited. 40 minutes later, headlights approached. A single vehicle. Deputy Anna Reeves's cruiser. She parked and got out slowly, her hand near her weapon. "I'm unarmed," Ghost called out. "Just want to talk." Anna walked over. She saw Thomas in the passenger seat and her eyes widened. "You left the hospital. The sheriff has an APB out for you. Says you're a danger to yourself." "I'm a danger to someone," Thomas said. "Just not myself." Anna looked from Thomas to Ghost, then back. She made a decision. "Okay, show me what you've got." Ghost pulled out his laptop. For the next 30 minutes, he walked her through everything he'd found. The shell corporations, the property transfers, the payments to Sheriff Brennan. The insurance policy Vanessa had taken out on Thomas, the connection to Richard Crane's criminal network. And then he showed her the photographs, Thomas's wheelchair on the tracks, the zip tie, the leather restraints. Photos Ghost had taken before the sheriff arrived, using a telephoto lens from half a mile away. "I've been watching this town for 3 days," Ghost explained. "Since Reaper called me worried about his wife. I got here this morning. When I couldn't reach him, I went to his house. I saw Vanessa wheel him out around 2 p.m., saw her put him on the tracks, saw Sheriff Brennan parked on the access road, waiting. I was about to intervene when Sophie showed up. I documented everything." He showed Anna the photos. Vanessa pushing the wheelchair, Thomas unconscious, the train approaching, Sophie's desperate rescue. The sheriff arriving suspiciously fast. "Why didn't you help?" Anna asked. "Because if I interfered, there'd be no evidence. It would have been my word against theirs. Now I have photos, timestamps, and an unimpeachable witness in Sophie Martinez." Anna stared at the laptop screen. Thomas saw the moment she made her choice, the moment she decided to become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. "Crane is untouchable in this county," she said. "He owns the sheriff, half the town council. If we go through local channels, this disappears." "Then we don't go local," Ghost said. "We go federal, FBI, maybe ATF, DEA if we can prove the money laundering. But we need more. We need Crane or the sheriff or Vanessa to confess on tape." Anna looked at Thomas. "You're talking about making yourself bait." "Yes. They tried to kill you once. They'll try again. I'm counting on it." A plan began to form. Dangerous, precise. The kind of operation Thomas had run 100 times in hostile territory. Except this time, the hostile territory was his hometown, and the enemy was his wife. But Thomas Calloway was Delta Force. He'd survived worse. He'd overcome impossible odds. And now, with Ghost and Deputy Anna Reeves beside him, and Atlas at his feet, he had something he hadn't had on those train tracks. He had allies, he had hope, and he had the truth. "All right," Thomas said, his voice steady and cold. "Let's give them what they want. Let's make them think they've won, and then let's burn their whole corrupt empire to the ground." Outside the abandoned grain elevator, the afternoon sun was setting over Millbrook. A new evening, a new war, and this time, Thomas Calloway was ready. The plan was simple, dangerous, but simple. Thomas would go back to the hospital, back to Vanessa's carefully constructed performance of the concerned wife, back to Sheriff Brennan's narrative of the confused, suicidal veteran. He would play broken, defeated, medicated into submission. And while they thought they'd won, while they relaxed into the certainty that their problem had been handled, Ghost would be watching. Recording. Building the case that would destroy them all. "You sure about this?" Ghost asked. They were sitting in the truck, dusk settling over the mountains, Atlas curled in the back seat. "Once you go back, you're alone. I can't protect you inside." "I won't be alone," Thomas said, reaching back to scratch Atlas behind the ears. "And I've been alone in worse places." Deputy Anna Reeves had already returned to the hospital, covering Thomas's absence with a story about him being moved for additional tests. It would buy them maybe an hour before anyone noticed the truth. Ghost drove Thomas back, using service roads, staying off the main routes. They pulled up to a side entrance just as the evening shift was changing. The brief chaos of doctors and nurses coming and going provided perfect cover. 72 hours, Ghost said as Thomas transferred back to his wheelchair. "That's how long we have before Crane makes another move. He thinks the train was supposed to solve his problem. When it didn't, he'll escalate. Be ready." Thomas nodded. "See you on the other side, brother." He wheeled himself back inside, Atlas at his side. The dog's presence was a comfort. More than that, it was a weapon. Atlas's senses would warn him of danger long before Thomas could see it coming. Vanessa was in his room, pacing. When Thomas opened the door, she spun around. Relief flooded her face. Too much relief. Too perfectly performed. "Thomas, where were you? The nurses said you needed tests but wouldn't tell me what kind. I was so worried." "Just some scans," Thomas said, keeping his voice flat. Defeated. "They want to make sure the fall didn't cause any internal injuries." "Fall?" Vanessa's brow furrowed. So the sheriff hadn't told her the official story yet. She was working without a script. When I fell off the tracks, when I tried to hurt myself. Thomas looked down at his hands. That's what the sheriff thinks happened. That I wheeled myself out there because I couldn't handle being like this anymore. He gestured at his legs, at the wheelchair. Let the bitterness seep into his voice. It wasn't hard. The bitterness was real, just not for the reasons Vanessa would think. Oh, baby. She knelt beside his chair, took his bandaged hands in hers. I know this has been hard. I know you've been struggling. But I'm here. We'll get through this together. Thomas looked at her. At the woman wearing a mask so perfect she might have forgotten her own real face underneath. I'm tired, Vanessa. I'm so tired of fighting. Then don't fight. She whispered. Just let me take care of you. Let me help you rest. Rest. The same word she'd used before she gave him the drugged tea. Thomas felt Atlas tense beside him, the dog's instinct screaming danger. The doctor wants to keep me another day, Thomas said. For observation. Then I can come home. Home, Vanessa echoed. Yes, we'll get you home and comfortable. Everything will be better at home. That afternoon, while Vanessa was gone, supposedly getting Thomas fresh clothes from the house, Deputy Reeves slipped into his room. She moved quickly, efficiently. She placed a small device behind the headboard of Thomas's hospital bed, another in the bathroom, a third in the wheelchair itself, hidden in the frame where no one would think to look. Audio only, she explained quietly. But high quality. Everything said in this room, in your house, anywhere you go, we'll hear it. Ghost is monitoring from a location I'm not going to tell you about. If things go wrong, I can have state police here in 3 minutes. It won't be enough time, Thomas said. I know. That's why you have Atlas. And this. She pressed something into his hand. A small panic button, disguised as a key fob. 1 press, that's all it takes. We come running. She left as quietly as she'd arrived. 24 hours later, Thomas was discharged. Vanessa drove him home in their modified van, making small talk about the weather, about the neighbors, about everything except the fact that she'd tried to kill him 3 days ago. The house looked exactly the same, but Thomas saw it differently now. This wasn't his home. It was a crime scene. Every room held evidence of betrayal. The kitchen where Vanessa had prepared the drugged tea. The living room where she'd waited for him to lose consciousness. The back door she'd wheeled him through into the afternoon. Let's get you settled, Vanessa said, her voice bright. Too bright. I'll make dinner. Something light. You must be starving after that hospital food. I'm not hungry. You need to keep your strength up. She was already moving to the kitchen, pulling out pots and pans. I'll make soup. That beef stew you like. Thomas wheeled himself to the living room. Through the window, he could see the access road that led to the train tracks. Could see the place where his wife had tried to end his life. Atlas growled. Low. Urgent. His eyes were fixed on the street outside. A black Range Rover was parking across the street. Richard Crane stepped out. Thomas had never met the man face to face, but he recognized him from Marcus's files. Tall, silver hair, expensive suit. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. He walked straight to Thomas's front door and knocked. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She saw Crane through the window and froze. Just for a second. Then she opened the door. Richard, what a surprise. Thomas, this is Richard Crane. He's been helping with some property management questions I had. Mr. Calloway? Crane said, extending his hand. Thomas didn't take it. I heard about your terrible accident. I wanted to stop by and see if there was anything I could do to help. I have resources, connections to excellent rehabilitation facilities." "I don't need a rehabilitation facility." Of course not, of course not." Crane invited himself in, his eyes sweeping the room, assessing, calculating. "I also wanted to discuss a business proposition. I'm developing properties in this area, creating jobs, improving the community. Your property would be valuable to that vision. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer." Thomas said nothing. He just stared at the man who'd orchestrated his attempted murder. "The thing is," Crane continued, sitting down uninvited, "this neighborhood is changing, improving. Property values are going up, but that also means property taxes will increase. Maintenance costs. For someone in your situation, with your medical expenses, it might make more sense to sell now. Take the profit. Move somewhere more suitable for your needs." "This house is suitable for my needs." "Is it?" Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. A man in a wheelchair, living on the edge of town. So isolated. What if something happened? "What if you needed help and no one could hear you? That's dangerous, Mr. Calloway." There it was. The threat, barely veiled. Said right in Thomas's living room while the recording devices captured every word. "I'm not interested in selling." "I understand. You're emotional right now. You've been through trauma. But perhaps you should discuss this with your wife. After all, she'd be the one left to manage this property if something happened to you." "That's a heavy burden. Vanessa, surely you see the wisdom in this." Vanessa looked between them. Thomas saw her calculating, trying to figure out how much to reveal. "We'll talk about it," she said carefully. "Please do." Crane stood, straightening his jacket. "Oh, and Mr. Calloway, I heard the sheriff's department concluded your incident was a suicide attempt. Such a shame. PTSD is a terrible thing. I do hope you're getting the help you need. It would be tragic if you had another episode. Tragic for everyone." He left, and the room felt colder. Vanessa turned to Thomas, her mask slipping slightly. "He's right, you know. This house is too much for us. For you, maybe we should consider, who is he really, Vanessa?" "What?" "Richard Crane. Who is he to you?" Her face went carefully blank. "I told you, he's a developer. He's been advising me on property values." "You're lying. Thomas, you're being paranoid again. The doctors said this might happen. The stress, the medication. I'm not paranoid, and I'm not crazy. I know what happened on those tracks. I know who put me there." Vanessa's expression changed. The concerned wife disappeared. What replaced it was something cold. Something Thomas had never seen before. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" They stared at each other. The pretense was gone now. They both knew. The question was what happened next. "Thomas," Vanessa said softly, dangerously, "you need to sign the property over. You need to do it quietly. And then you need to go away. Somewhere you'll be taken care of. A facility. There are nice ones. Expensive ones. I'll visit. Will you? If you fight this, if you make trouble, things will get worse. Much worse. Not just for you. That girl, Sophie, the one who saved you. Such a sweet kid. Works late shifts at that diner. Walks home alone through dark streets. Anything could happen." Thomas felt ice form in his chest. "You're threatening a 17-year-old girl." "I'm protecting what's mine. What I've earned. You don't understand what it's been like, Thomas. Taking care of you. Watching you struggle. Watching our life disappear. I deserve better than this." "You deserve prison." Vanessa laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think anyone will believe you? You're the crazy veteran who tried to kill himself. I'm the devoted wife holding everything together. Sheriff Brennan will back me up. Richard will back me up. We control this town. You're alone." "No," Thomas said quietly. "I'm not." The front door exploded inward. Not literally, but it felt that way. Ghost came through first, moving fast, his weapon drawn. Behind him, Deputy Reeves and 4 state police officers in tactical gear. "Vanessa Calloway, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Anna announced, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Vanessa's face went white. She spun toward Thomas. "You were recording. The whole time. You were recording." "Every word." Thomas confirmed. Richard Crane is being arrested as we speak," Ghost said, "along with Sheriff Brennan. FBI's at his office right now. Your whole operation is done." As they led Vanessa out in handcuffs, she looked back at Thomas one last time. The mask was completely gone now. What was left was rage. Pure, impotent rage. "I should have made sure that train hit you." "Yeah," Thomas said. "You should have." 3 months later, Thomas sat on the witness stand in a federal courthouse. He told his story. Sophie Martinez told hers. Marcus Chen presented his evidence. Deputy Anna Reeves, now Sheriff Anna Reeves, testified about the corruption she'd witnessed. The recordings played for the jury. Vanessa's threats, Crane's barely veiled confession, Sheriff Brennan's attempted cover-up. The verdict came back unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa took a plea deal, testifying against Crane and Brennan in exchange for 25 years instead of life. Richard Crane got 40 years for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and money laundering. Former Sheriff Brennan got 35. 6 months after that, Thomas stood in front of a room full of veterans. He wore his old Delta Force jacket, the patches worn but proud. Atlas sat beside him, calm and dignified, wearing his own vest that read, "Service Dog Ambassador." "They tried to make me a victim," Thomas told the assembled group. "Tried to make my disability define me. Tried to make me believe I was broken, useless, better off dead." He looked down at his wheelchair, then back at the crowd. Sophie Martinez was there, wearing her college acceptance letter like armor. Sheriff Reeves sat in the front row. Marcus stood in the back, arms crossed, proud. "But here's what I learned," Thomas continued. "You're not defined by what you've lost. You're defined by what you refuse to give up. Your honor, your purpose, your will to fight back. They took my legs in Kandahar, but they couldn't take what made me a warrior. Nothing can take that unless you surrender it." He reached down and scratched Atlas behind the ears. "And you're never alone. Not if you have people or dogs who refuse to leave you behind." The room erupted in applause. Later, outside in the parking lot, Ghost clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "Not bad, Reaper." "Not bad at all. Thanks for coming when I called." "Brother, I'll always come when you call. That's what family does." Thomas looked up at the clear Colorado sky. The mountains in the distance. The town he'd almost lost his life in, now clean, rebuilding, becoming something better. He was alive, he was free, and he was still fighting. That was enough. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories of courage and faith. And in the comments, type Amen if you believe that real loyalty never abandons you in your darkest hour. May God bless every veteran watching this, and may He remind you that your worth is not determined by what you've lost, but by what you refuse to let go of, your honor, your purpose, and your will to stand again. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay faithful, and never ever give up.